Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how colonialism, but only when it's practiced by white folks, is viewed now as being part of the white supremacy narrative that the globalist and their two-bit stooge flunkies in the media are pushing. So wherever white people have acted as in or gathered colonies or taken colonies, then that's now white supremacy, and they've got an automatic escalation. If it's white supremacy, then it must be fascism. If it's fascism, it must be Nazism. If it's Nazism, all white people are therefore Hitler. So that's the childlike, juvenile antics that they get up to. So it's association, conflation, and then escalation is the way they do this. So given they're so morally superior, aren't they just practicing their moral supremacy to attack the white supremacy? And why is their supremacy any better than anyone else's supremacy? Or was it never white supremacy in the first place? The idea that when colonies first started being a thing, that people would have viewed it as a white issue or something like that it's just beyond absurd. In the later 1800s, there was a view of when colonies were pretty much at an end anyway, or coming to an end. There was this white man's burden view that was put about by people such as Rudyard Kipling, quite a famous writer in the late 1800s and early 1900s. As writers go, he was sort of a bit of a rock star of his era, really. So he reflected a view that some people, particularly in the ruling classes, had at the time, was that given that there are many parts of the globe, whether it be in Asia or Africa and elsewhere, where the people there, Australia, the people there were very few in number generally, but they were also technologically somewhere between 3,000 or 2,500 and 10,000 years technologically behind the West. Now, in order to have the technology and government and legal practices, then there's a certain sort of organizational development that's required as well. And again, these parts of the globe, because they were thousands upon thousands of years technologically behind, they were also organizationally behind. They didn't have the legal structures and all the things that in the West were being taken for granted at the time. So the view was that it was the duty, if you like, of the advanced, technologically and organizationally advanced Western nations to impart their knowledge of government and the civis and politics and technology to these less advanced peoples, and that was referred to as the white man's burden. It's been misinterpreted today or during the course of activism as if it was some sort of white supremacy thing. But let's look at supremacy. If Bob runs faster than Bill, what do you call Bill then? If Bill's the faster runner, is he a foot supremacist or a running supremacist or a sports supremacist? Is that what you call someone who comes first? What name do you give it? Is it somehow evil or immoral to do that? Now, when one race of people that's many thousands of years technologically ahead of another, they are superior, whether you like it or not, or it's not a moral issue in itself. But when you're that far, when there's that much difference in technological and organizational and financial and legal development, that many thousands of years, the more advanced nation is the superior. Now, whether you call it white supremacy or technical supremacy or organizational supremacy or something else, that's beside the point. But it's not white supremacy. That's bullshit. And wherever you hear it or see it or reject it, push back against it. It's not real. It's not true. It's not accurate. There was a technical difference. One race was technically vastly ahead of the other in every measurable respect. And whether or not you'd say that's a moral difference, that's a separate act. But technically, organisationally, and all that sort of thing, they were miles ahead, thousands of years ahead. But that is not the same as white supremacy. It is technical supremacy, and we need to be absolutely crystal clear on that. So coming back to the colonial thing, the colonies were initially perceived as simply trading. When the white people first went to Western Europeans, thus white people, first went to, say, the North Americas, the population of North Americas was quite sparse. Most of not all, but most of the Indian tribes were fairly nomadic, and they'd have their summer hunting grounds, their winter ones, often following, say, herds of buffalo around, things like that. So these areas looked like they were vacant, and there was no crops planted there. There's no animals being run on them. So quite reasonably, the people who came along said, well, there's nobody here. There's no buildings. There's no fields. There's nothing, no ploughed fields. There's no pens with animals in it. So let's talk to the local natives and see what they want for it, and offer them a few axes or this, whatever. And the natives would go, yep, you can have that land, and we'll take those we'll take those iron tools, because iron was a very advanced technology to these people, and they'd never seen anything like this. Its toughness, its reliability, it's long. You could use it for long periods of time and that sort of thing. So that was how the first colonies started, but primarily they were for trading. they weren't for they weren't to oppress another race or take their land or push them around or slap them down. That was nonsense. It was purely for trade, and that's how it began. No, not that disputes didn't later come. Of course they did. And not that the natives didn't get sick from the Western European diseases. They did. So all that happened, but that's got nothing to do with white supremacy. Nothing to do with white supremacy or any nonsense about superiority. And again, these people who lecture us, they say, well, I'm morally superior, therefore I can lecture you. Where does their fucking moral superiority come from? Well, why are they morally superior? And why does that give them license to lecture and finger wag everyone else? It doesn't. And they're self-styled moral superiority is no better or worse in the overall scheme of things than the so-called white supremacy that they accuse everyone else of. So it's bullshit, and push back against it where you see it. So these trading posts would sometimes they would stay as trading posts, or sometimes they would expand beyond that. But there was also situations, say, in populated areas, like, as a case in point, India. Now, the Indian propagandists love to put it around that India was the richest country in the world, swimming in wealth, and was all sweetness and light, and everybody loved everyone else, and so on, in the early to mid 1700s. And that was total bullshit, by the way. But that's the propaganda they like to put about. And then the second that the evil white folks turn up, in India's wealth just vaporized overnight. The second the white folks turned up. Now, the days when the white folks turned up, they had sailing ships, they had flintlock muskets, cannons, and so on. There wasn't a vast difference, but they were much better organised. They were far more cohesive, and also what particularly unnerved the Indian soldiers, the way the Europeans would march into battle taking shots. So as you're shooting at them, shooting arrows and throwing spears, whatever, they would hold their formation, they would lower their muskets with the bayonets on it and would keep on walking forward. That unnerved the crap out of the Indian warriors and armies and so on. And when they saw that, they just took flight and ran off. So many of the victories that were won by the Europeans in the Indian subcontinent were the troops had barely engaged before the other side ran off. So, but what happened early in India, or during the European presence in India, and there were the Portuguese, French, Dutch, and British were there, trading initially. So what happened was that there were so many civil wars and internal strife. So again, comes back this idea of India was this rich, harmonious sort of nation. This bullshit. It was hundreds of small principalities constantly at war with each other and bickering over all sorts. As India is today. India's like that today, and so it was then. So one of the regions that had a local potentate, like a local warlord sort of dude. He was engaged in a war with some other crowd nearby, and he went to, I think it was the British first. Went to the British and said, "Look, can you help me duff these other guys up?" The British go, "It's going to be a bit expensive. What do we get out of this?" "Well, I'll give you, this, that, and the next thing, trading rights, and you can have next year's harvest of spice and so on. So and a bit of gold and yada yada." So the British helped, and then the guy with the British assistance prevailed in that conflict. But after this, actually, now I've the problem's gone away. I don't feel like honouring the contract. Oh, is that right, buddy? No, we've fulfilled our end of the bargain. You're going to fulfil yours, and some of this led to unpleasantness, as you can imagine, and at times the British were so annoyed, or the Europeans, the British were so annoyed by the constant warfare and raiding and counter raiding that it was upsetting their commerce, that they couldn't do business in a place that was constantly in a state of drama like that. So they would say, okay, well, look, we're going to put our guy in. So they'd find a local guy who would do as he's told and so on. And say, okay, well, this is, you're in charge now, but you can do what you want. But when it comes to trade and the big money, big ticket stuff, you got to do what we tell you, because this is why we're putting you in there, so we can trade without aggravation and drama and carry on. So this was and India has been a place of strife, forever. And even now, it's a land where there's no common language throughout, and there are dialects that are so different from one another, they're effectively a different language. So, and that's that same way today. India was just a patchwork of small petty states, and the idea that technically it was a rich country because it had a lot of agricultural land. So the Indian propagandists of the day have sort of valued that, very, very optimistically valued that, and said, therefore, India was the richest country in the world, by far, which is bullshit, total bullshit. But that's what the propagandists are putting about. But as part of the empire and part of colonialism, the British were better organised, they were more cohesive, they were technologically more advanced, and they had interesting things that most of these countries most of these places and peoples never heard of, like contract law and upholding contracts, independent courts of law, and then bringing things like railroads and whatnot there. And this idea that India was a technically advanced economy when the white folks turned up. If the argument the propagandists put of India was at least as more technically advanced than the Europeans were when the European. If that was the case, why did Europeans so easily take control? If you look at the casualties that the Europeans suffered in their various sort of military confrontations with the Indians, then it was the most cheaply won victory I think ever, given the population of the Indian subcontinent. So this again is nonsense that they were technically advanced. Now the Taj Mahal and so on was drawn from the same Islamic sort of technology that was in the Alejandra in Spain and some of the magnificent palaces that were in the Ottoman Empire and so on. So that wasn't an achievement outside of that already established technology of building, and it was only made possible by masses of peasant labour that was being used, many of whom perished in the process. So looking at just coming to this colonialism thing, was it an issue of white supremacy or some sort of white supremacy act? It never was, and it's absurd, absolutely absurd, and quite false to claim it. So when you hear it and see it, push back against it because it's not real. And then you ask these people that so claim, what moral right do they have? Are they moral supremacists? And then who gave them that title? You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.